Okay, so this evening we're going to have a look at a free aircraft that's become available for X-Plane. It's the Marchietti S-211. I think there's also an S-311 in the same package. This is the older variant of the aircraft that doesn't have the electronic cockpit, which I think makes it a bit more interesting. So if we go and get inside the aircraft and we go and have a look around inside, I'm just going to configure my view slightly. So how do we get this started up? First thing we're going to need to do is go and close the canopy, which we can click that to do. And then we're going to switch on the batteries, switch on generators, inverters. Has it got oxygen in here? Fuel, pumps to on. Oh, doesn't look like they've got control in the cockpit. So it looks like we just have to I'm just having a quick look around. I don't think any of this is operational. No, the mouse isn't changing as we move over it. I don't think the oxygen system is working either. Anyway, yeah, let's go and just start the engine up. So we turn starters on, and it's got a nice sample sound of an engine starting up. Unfortunately, when you let go of it, it doesn't sound anywhere near as good. So we'll just hold that on for a few seconds. Yeah, that's the end of the sample. Okay, so if we zoom back out and we release the wheel brakes, we're at Tonopah Test Range in America, or Tonopah, however you want to pronounce it. We are going to taxi down to the runway and have a bit of a fly around and then come in and land and see how well it behaves. So what instruments do we have? If I just talk while we're steering. We've got the speed here in hundreds of knots, so 100, 150, 200, 300 knots, 400. We've got G meter, we've got the clock, we've got radios, we've then got obviously artificial horizon, the compass, cabin altimeter, and then we've got the aircraft altimeter, we've got vertical speed, we've got some engine gauges and fuel gauges. I think that's about it. Obviously you've got the undercarriage down here. But yeah, I think the rest of it is just for display really, but for a free aircraft it's pretty amazing. So let's just taxi down onto the runway and see how it behaves. Let's just go down a little bit. Obviously in the real world we would stop short of the runway, but I'm not simulating any other aircraft being around, so we're out here on our own. Okay, here we go, full throttle. I'm not going to use flaps for takeoff. I want to get a nice smooth fast takeoff run. It's a massively long runway. So we'll rotate at about 125 knots or so. Rotate. Didn't want the nose to come up, did it? How it behaves as we fly low along the runway. It's predictable, quite smooth. Trim is quite violent. Okay, coming up for 250 knots. Okay, let's try some high G turns. So what's the G meter saying? 4G, 5G. So it's okay. We're sustaining a 4G turn, look. And it's holding on to 200 knots while doing so. That's quite impressive. Let's come in low and fast down the runway and then we'll go for a loop. we'll try to get to 300 knots. Try and stay aligned along the runway. Whoa! Should really learn where the aircraft's pointing, shouldn't I? So we're doing 300 knots. Let's go for the loop. Pretty predictable, really, wasn't it? Wasn't very straight, but oh well. Okay, so obviously it rolls, you can see around its axis quite nicely. No real problems if I waggle the aircraft. There's not much induced yaw, which is quite cool. Let's try, we're coming up to 300 knots again. Let's see how many G we can pull. So that's about 7G, that spiked up to then, before the speed disappeared. Coming up to 300 knots, see how fast it will go, low and along the runway. 350 knots. Coming up for 400. I expect it would do about 400 knots at sea level then, which is not bad, not bad at all. Okay, let's look out the side and go for a climb. See what happens when it stalls. Looks like it's going to lose the engine. Oh, it started to spin then. Not quite though. So it's not perfectly stable, because it flew itself back out of it as it gained speed. Maybe I'm going to go for another run at that. So we'll pull in along the runway. Coming up to 400 knots. Look sideways. Pull up into the vertical. Wait for it to run out of speed. And that's about it. It's going to fall over anytime soon. Okay, so it's the momentum when it falls. You could, if you held the control inputs in place, you could probably force it to depart from controlled flight. So I'm just gliding in, coming up to 350 knots. Let's brake. Flying towards the hill over here. I think it's that hill, isn't it? I'm trying to remember the scenery around Tonopah. So let's then turn and fall back in towards the airbase. Coming through 200 knots. There's the runway. Let's see how fast it loses the speed. So the engine's on idle. Yeah, it really isn't going to lose that speed, is it? Still doing 190 knots-ish. Interesting. So on idle, it will just about hold speed, which is crazy. So we'll fly back out. Give ourselves a bit more of a view of the instruments. Okay, gear down. It's a massively long runway, isn't it? Obviously the wheels have given us enough drag to pull the plane down. Small bounce there, but nothing too drastic. And we're down. I'm so used to flying the big jets, I always offset the pilot to the side of the runway middle. Okay, let's see what the brakes are like. Pretty violent, actually. That's wanting to tip over. What about the wheel, nose wheel steering? How vicious is it? Okay, so that's a Marchietti S-211. It's pretty good fun. I think it would be quite, I don't know, difficult for long flights there if you can only do 400 knots. Or 350 knots really. So let's just go and park this up. I wonder if the shutdown sequence is just the opposite, I guess, just shut the engine down and then turn the electrics back off. It hasn't really got much else to do, has it? It's kind of massively simplified. Oh, I didn't play with the autopilot, did I? I wonder if it's got one. Oh well, we'll have a go another day with that, I guess. Should we pull into the hangar? Looks a bit different, doesn't it? So there you go. The Marchietti S-211 in Flight Simulator. Sorry, in X-Plane, what am I talking about? So it's a free download. You can search for it online. It's very good.